So I think we'll get started. Just for anyone that's just joined, sorry for people that have been here for a while, third time I've said this, there's a couple of tips to how to make your screen a little bit bigger if you're planning on following along. There's also 2 links to download Excel files. First one is the preferable one if you've got an Excel version after 2007. Second one is if you've got pre-2007 Excel files. Some of the functionality that we're going to cover today, unfortunately, won't work in all pre-2007 versions, but hopefully you'll still get something out of today. Cool, and I realised this is like the last session of the last day, so I commend anyone who is still here, so thank you very much for coming along. Cool, so this is a workshop on Excel. Who am I? I'm Aileen, and I work as an instructor at CodeClan, which is a social enterprise in Scotland, and we teach courses on data and also software development. I'm also a volunteer at the wonderful DataKind UK. So this workshop is very practical, absolutely no pressure if you don't want to follow along, you can also just watch. And don't worry if things don't work for you. Everything's a little bit different, and there's also almost 30 different versions of Excel to date. So it's very difficult or almost impossible to do a workshop that is compatible with everyone's version of Excel. So I'm going to be using Excel version for 2013. So yours, depending on your version, might look a little bit different. Your buttons might be in different places. But a lot of the core functionality is going to be the same. So if you get stuck on any bits, don't worry. All the workshop is like kind of in separate parts. So it's a bit unlike the Tableau one from earlier today, if you were at that one, where it's very follow along. Hopefully you should still pick up stuff. But yeah, if you want to follow along, please download the files which I've sent. But like I say, I'm going to be sending all the slides along, and of course there'll be the recording, but the slides cover everything step by step, so you can let me know if you've got any questions about them. I'll send them at the end of the talk. So hopefully people know what Excel is, which is why we're here. It's a spreadsheet application, and it's part of the Microsoft Office suite. There's similar products that you can use for spreadsheets like Google Sheets, and Numbers in Mac, and a lot of like the kind of core functionality is similar. They say that Excel is the widest used data tool. Apparently it's used by 750 million people worldwide, which is pretty mental. And Excel skills are hugely transferable and valuable. Learning, and it doesn't need to be advanced Excel, you don't necessarily need to get into all these additional add-ons. But knowing good spreadsheet setup and how to use things like functions well can save you so much time in the long run. There's that initial steep learning curve, but then long term, trying to rectify inefficient formats of files is hopefully going to save you a lot of time. Also encourage you guys might know some Excel things that I don't, or have some tips, so please share them with each other on the chat if you do have any. So if you want to follow along, I'm going to encourage you to download the files which are linked in the chat, and we are going to open Excel Workshop Examples #1 file. So open. So we're going to talk a little bit quickly, just so we're all up to speed on the terminology. So the spreadsheet as a whole is called a workbook. Each tab, there's kind of many tabs within the workbook, which is called a worksheet. You've got your rows on the left-hand side, which are all numbered to denote a single row, and you've got the columns up the top, which are all lettered. And once they reach Z, it gets to like AA, and so on and so forth. You can also click a specific cell, which is where a number and a row intersect. So here, that is cell B2. And you can also highlight or select areas. And when you select an area, it is denoted from the top left cell to the bottom right. So this is area A1 to C6. So A1 to C6. You'll also see that there's this toolbar up the top, which has different tabs, home, insert, page layout, etc. And if you ever have it that the tab along the toolbar along the top keeps folding down whenever you're kind of clicking around and you have to actually press it for it to appear, you can click on the little pin at the bottom right, and that pins the toolbar at the top if it keeps folding away, because more often than not you're going to need to use it. So that's good for pinning that down. So the first thing that we're going to talk a little bit about is formatting. So we're going to go to the Format tab. All of these are the number 1 formatted in different ways. And there's a kind of Excel joke that Excel turns everything into dates. That is maybe for a niche crowd, but hopefully the crowd that's here today. So the number 1 can be formatted in many different ways. And the way that you can check how something's formatted is on the Home tab. When you're selected into a cell, you can see what the format is. And this is all about aesthetically looking at the numbers. So, you know, if you want to do financial information or something like a percentage, the way that that's formatted is important. You can do more number formats down the bottom, and you can start to get into more specific stuff there, like the number of decimal places. I personally am a massive fan of using comma separators for thousands. It depends what country you're in. Different countries use different separators, but I think if you've got values with loads of zeros, a comma separator makes it much easier for people to read them off quite quickly. You can also do formatting that's like K instead of thousands as well. So yeah, there's lots of different things that you can do there. So that's a little bit about formatting. If you want to change the formatting, then it's easy enough to go in here and change the format so it's the right thing. Speaking of formatting, we're going to go to the next tab, and this is a little bit about Format Painter. So Format Painter is really handy. Sometimes you can spend a lot of time formatting cells. So, you know, I've made these into pounds with the right amount of decimal places. I put a nice little border around it, and I've made a nice colour on the top of my table. So I've spent a lot of nice time doing this, and I want to apply this formatting to these cells. I could manually go in and apply the formatting, or I can use the Format Painter. So if you select cells B2 to B5, click on Format Painter, which is in the Home tab, the top of the Home tab. And other versions of Excel, it might just be a little paintbrush icon as well. It might not say Format Painter. And once you see this kind of spiral going around it, that means that you've copied the format. And if you click on cells D2 to D5 and then let go, that applies that formatting to these other cells. So that can be really handy and save you a bit of time if you want to format some new cells. The next thing that we're going to talk about in the next tab is AutoFit. So AutoFit is really handy if you've got things that are different sizes. So for example, this seems to have not saved correctly. So I'm just going to show you what I wanted it to look like, which was that some of the columns are really wide, some of the rows are really wide, and maybe one of the columns is too small. And what this does is it ends up using inefficient amount of space within your spreadsheet. So if you want to rectify this, you can either do it at a column or row basis. So if I select the whole column on column C and go along to Format and Auto Fit Column Width. So on the Home tab, I go along to Cells Format and go to Auto Fit Column Width. Then it makes it as wide as the longest thing in that column. I'm going to undo that. There's also a shortcut that you can, if you hover in between columns C and D, if you hover between the columns C and D, this kind of little two-way pointy arrow comes up, and you can double click between C and D, and that will rectify that. If you want to apply auto formatting to your whole spreadsheet, which is usually the easiest thing to do, You can select your whole spreadsheet by clicking the button at the top left, and you can go to Format, Auto Fit Row Height, Auto Fit Column Width, and that does that nicely for you, and kind of makes things as wide or as tall as they need to be. So auto fit, really handy, and kind of stops inefficient use of space there. Another one, in a kind of similar vein, if you've got text that kind of like hides behind another cell. So we've actually got some text in here that's being hidden. This is some long text, very inventive. So you could use auto fit here to make that column wider. Another option is also text wrap. So you can either select the cell A1 or select the whole column, and text wrap is under the Home tab, under Alignment, text wrap. And what that does is it wraps the text so that the column is only as wide as you currently have it, but then makes your row as wide as it needs to be to fit all the text that's in there. So text wrap is quite another handy way to kind of make sure that all your stuff is seen there. The next kind of small thing that we're going to look at is merge. So you can merge cells if you like. We're about to talk about why you shouldn't, but if you so wish to merge a cell, you can do this. So here is two tables of data. If I click on cell A1, I can see that A1, B1, and C1 are all separate. But if I click on cell E1, I see that this is actually a merged cell. So to get these to be merged, and it's quite nice because then the term table 2 sits exactly in the middle of the table. But what you can do is select A1 to C1, and under Alignment, click Merge and Center. But we're about to talk about why we should not do this. We're going to talk a wee bit about good practices of setup. So what I will say is these tips are if you plan on using Excel for things like calculations. So these tips are not so much an issue if you plan on just having your data in a table in Excel to, visually look at the table. But at the end of the day, Excel is set up and designed for you to do calculations on data. And these are some tips I would give if you want to set up your spreadsheets in a kind of optimal way to do this. So one tip is have one data type or variable, as you may call it, so like a column in your data set per column. So this is really good because it means you can apply functions on a whole column. And we're going to see lots of examples of this. This avoids issues of applying functions to a particular cell or a particular area of cells, which will cause issues if you add more data into your spreadsheet. Don't have headers halfway through. That kind of aligns with the first tip of making sure you have one data type or column in your data per column in Excel. And also don't have colors to distinguish different categories of data if you plan on using formulas on them, because you can't use a formula on a color, but if you have that information as a separate column, you can. And we're going to see some examples of this. So this is a kind of good practice on the left, bad practice on the left. What I will say again, just to reiterate, this is if you are setting it up to do calculations. Because as you can see here, the value on the left is easy for me to read as a human, information on some volunteers and different services and staff in my service, and information on who's active and who's not. But if you set it up in what's called this tidy long format of data on the right, this is great setup for allowing you to use calculations, because I don't have to kind of pinpoint certain areas of cells to use my functions on. So if you're using Excel in terms of calculations, set up on the right there is really good. And we're going to look at a couple of examples of that. If you do want to do some kind of conditional formatting in any way, so say this is for aesthetically looking at your data, not necessarily for calculations, you can do things like this. So this is quite easy. If you think about it on this column here, A2 to A6, as a human, it takes me a minute to say, okay, 5's the lowest there, 6 is a bit bigger than 5, then there's 8, etc. Whereas if you do things like these conditional formattings, it's easy for you to see that 18 is the biggest number, followed by 12. And then you can do things like the colors, red being the lowest, green being the highest. You can set it the other way around if that's what you want. And also things like these icons. So you can do things like this by, if I highlight, this is in the conditional formatting tab, cells L2 to L6. Under the Home tab, if you go to conditional formatting, you can go to data bars. What I would say is I would avoid the use of the gradient fill ones. We're going to talk a little bit about good practices when it comes to visualization, but the kind of 3D grain effect doesn't help people be able to intake the information. So I would advise more a solid fill would be better. And that makes the bar 18 the longest, because that's your biggest number, and then all the sizes of the other bars are relative to that. This conditional formatting is done by color scales, and this one by icon sets in a very similar way that we've just done these bars. You can also do rules. So if I highlight cells O2 to O6, and I go to conditional formatting, and I go to highlight cell rules, you can create your own rules. So say like the value 10 was important to me because it was some sort of cutoff, and you can do greater than, and this little pop-up will appear, and you can say greater than 10, and you can specify how you want the cells that are greater than 10 to be highlighted, whatever you like. We can continue with the red theme, bit aggressive, but we'll go for it. Maybe it's a bad thing if you're over 10. So yes, you can use these rules as well. So again, this kind of thing, not so good if you want to use actual calculations on your data, but if it's for human reading off the table, then yeah, go for it. The next thing that we're going to talk about is sorting. So say we're going to talk a little bit later about ways we can get around these kind of manual steps of kind of assessing your data, because it can cause issues if you get new data in. But if you want to sort your data, you can say I have information here about service users that have visited our service. I can highlight column B, and I can go to sort and filter on the very right-hand side of the Home tab. And I'm going to say I want it to be newest to oldest. So I want the people that have visited my service most recently to then the furthest away. And you get this pop-up. And the first time I saw this in Excel, I was like, what is going on? This is actually Excel being really helpful, surprisingly not. And what it's saying is that it's like, are you sure you only want to sort this one column? Because I've kind of selected this one column. And it's kind of by default saying, are you not sure that you want to keep the connection between columns A and B? And yes, that's what I want to do. Don't follow this, but if I was to say no, I only want to sort the current selection, it only sorts column B, and I've lost that connection between which service user visited on what date. So I'm going to undo that, and we'll go back to sort and filter, newest to oldest, and I'm saying yes, I want to expand the section. And what that does is if there's columns to the left and right of this, then it's going to include that in the sorting. So I've retained that information that in fact it was person 41 who visited on the 27th of May, which is fantastic, what we want. You can also do like custom sorts as well. If you go to sort and filter custom sort, you can do other kinds of sorts. You can sort on more than one column. So maybe I want to sort by date of visit and then ID in case there's more than one person that came on a date. And you can also do cool sorts like, because there'll be text data, so the default would be alphabetical sorting. but we're going to see later there's nice sorting like day of the week, and it recognizes that Monday comes before Tuesday, etc., which is good because they don't come in alphabetical order, which is nice. So that's a little bit about sorting. We're then going to get on to filtering. So if you go to the filtering tab, you'll notice that on the filtering tab, there is kind of these drop-down arrows on A1, B1, and C1. And to get these filtering arrows, if you go to sort and filter, you can toggle the filter on and off. So this allows you to have these drop-down arrows to filter. And what you can do here, depending on the data type, you can filter your data. So if I select cell A, the drop-down on cell A1, I can manually deselect things like the value 5, the value 12 by just clicking these off here. But you can also do things like filter by rules. So if it's a number, I could say something like, I only want to return values that are greater than 10. Say, for example, I don't know why 10 seems to be my number of choice today, and my keyboard's been a bit crazy there. And you can do more than one rule. You could do greater than one number and less than a number. And what you'll see there is then I only get the values there that are greater than 10, and it kind of hides all these other ones. If you want to undo this at any point, you just click on the little filter, clear filter from value. So that's clicking on the little filter, clear filter from value, and you get back all your data. Similarly, if I have text, I can do, which is column B, I can do little rules, things like only want to return everyone whose first name begins with A, or something equally as meaningful as that. You can do things like that. And in fact, you can actually filter on a color. So if you have selected your data or highlighted your data in some way with colors, you can do the drop down at the top here, filter by colors, and you can select the color. So if you have used conditional formatting in any place, you can filter colors there, which is nice. Cool. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is series. So if you click onto the series tab, we're going to talk a little bit about dragging patterns. So sometimes you might want to repeat a pattern down your column, and you don't want to have to manually keep typing all your dates or your numbers or something like that. So I want you to click on cell A3. And what you'll see here, the pattern is like 7 days later. So I've got in cell A2, I've got the 1st of the 1st. And then in cell A3, I've got the 8th of the 1st, so 7 days later. And if I select cell A3 and I hover over the bottom right where there's the little plus appears, if I click it and drag it, what I get here is a pattern of 1 day later. So it's going from the 8th to the 9th, the 10th, etc. And this is probably not what we want, because we wanted that plus 7 day pattern. If you highlight both cells, the cell B2 and B3, so highlight cells B2 and B3 and drag these down, that plus 7 days pattern gets repeated. So dragging a kind of pattern down, it matters how many cells that you have selected. So if it's a date and you just pick one date and drag it, it's going to add 1. If you want some kind of pattern, maybe a plus 7, plus 14, something like that pattern to be repeated, what you want to do is input 2 cells. So in our case, B2 and B3, select these and drag them down. Let's see what happens when it's a number. If we're in cell D3 and I just select D3 and I drag that down, when it's a number, you just get the number repeated. So it just does like 8, 8, 8, 8. If I'm in cells E2 and E3, highlight both of these and drag them down, what we get is that plus 7 repeated pattern. So if it is a number and you select one cell and drag it, it repeats that number. If it's a date, it adds 1. And if you want some kind of pattern repeated, perhaps +7, +8, whatever, you can input 2 cells, select them both and drag them, and that gets repeated. You can also do formulas as well. So this in cell G3 is the cell above +7. So it is in G3, it's the cell above +7. And if I drag this, so if I select cell G3 and drag it, that +7 pattern gets repeated, because as I drag it down, all I'm telling Excel to do is add 7 to the cell above. Similar if I select I3 and drag that down. So nice ways to use formulas there as well, if you so wished, but you can also just use the dragging pattern as well. Cool. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is formulas, everyone's favorite. So we are going to the setup of formulas. Sometimes it's hard to know what all the formulas out there are. Google is definitely your friend here. If there's something common that people use a lot, someone will have created a formula for it. But sometimes it's hard to know what's the name of the formula. Googling it will definitely help you here, because people will have used it before. And the format of how we write formulas is always the same. It's the equal sign, then the name of the formula, open bracket, and then the inputs that we want in the formula. And the inputs are going to differ depending on what formula it is. These are some of the main formulas that I've used. You guys might also know some other formulas that you use well. You might have your favorite. Feel free to share them if you do. Big fan of sum ifs myself. But there's lots of different formulas out there. But these are some of the key ones, and we're going to talk about using some of these today. So if we go back to worksheet and we go to the formulas tab, we want to do a couple of different things here. So we have an ID column, an age column, a local authority column, a service column, and a date of joining. So we've got some information about our service users, and we want to do some formulas to work out something about them. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make 3 new columns in our data using formulas. And then after that, what we want to do is find out some summary statistics. So like a minimum, an average, a maximum, something like that, about our data sets. And because our spreadsheet is well set up that we have 1 column per piece of information in our tables, applying these formulas column-wise is going to be easy. Well, not necessarily easy in terms of understanding the formulas, but it's going to be good if we get new data into our data set. So the first thing is it's important to us to know what the age of our users are going to be in 10 years. So say we have some project plan, and we need to know what are they going to be the ages of people that use our service in 10 years' time. We can do the first thing that we're going to talk about is like a mathematical operation here. So if we want to do in cell F2, if we write the equal sign, and then what we want to do is highlight B2. So I want you to write the equal sign in cell F2, and then I want you to click into B2. Then what we're going to do is say plus 10. B2 plus 10, oh, there is Excel turning all my things into dates as we talked about earlier. So yes, this may happen in some cases. So I've just changed that by going up to the format up the top and going to the number cell there. So this service user 1 is going to be 55 in 10 years time. And now I've written that formula once, and if I hover over the bottom right of cell F2 and drag it down, that formula is now applied to all people in my data set. So I could keep dragging that as to however many people are in my data set, and you can actually do a wee trick. I think it works in this version. You can double click when you're in your top cell and you hover over that, and you get your plus in the bottom corner. If you double click on the plus, it auto kind of completes that formula for the whole of your data set that's there. Now, there's a slight issue here. This guy or girl is missing their age. And this is telling me that the person is going to be 10 in 10 years' time, but in fact, say that data is missing. We're going to learn a little bit about the if statement, which is great for dealing with missing values. So it can be dangerous, well, as dangerous as Excel gets, sometimes if you've got missing data, to leave it as a blank. Because when you go into your data sets here and you apply formulas, it can cause problems. So let's learn about the if statement and how we would deal with that. So if we want to create a new column where we say, is this person over 40? Okay, so is this person over 40? We are going to use the if statement. So an if statement is a really popular Excel function, and it goes as follows. We say if a certain criteria is met, then return this value, otherwise another value. Okay, so if a certain criteria is met, return this value or another value. So we're going to say in cell G2, we're going to say if, and then it tells you here what the arguments are going to be. So it's a logical test, and then the value if that logical test is true, and then the value if that logical test is false. So we're going to say if cell B2 is greater than 40, so if cell B2 is greater than 40, and this is the mathematical symbol for greater than, this little arrow pointing to the right. So if my value in cell B2 is greater than 40, comma, then return the word true, otherwise return the word false. If my value in B2 is greater than 40, return the value true, otherwise return the value false. And if you hit enter, then you're going to get a value of true if that person is over 40. And then I can just double click on there, and that gets auto-completed for the rest of my data. But what happens if I want something a bit more meaningful than true or false? I can go back into my formula by double clicking on the cell, or you can start writing in the formula bar up here as well. That's another option. So, oops, don't mention that. You can double click on the cell to get into the formula, or you can start writing in the formula bar up here. So I want to change it to say that I don't want the values true or false returned. I want something a bit more meaningful. So instead of true, in double quotation marks, to let Excel know that it's a string, we're going to say over 40. And instead of false, we are going to say not over 40. So if B2 is over 40, then return the term over 40, otherwise return not over 40. And then again, I can double click the bottom right, and I get now this kind of binary true false if that is the case. And the last column we're going to make is dealing with these missing values. So like I said, sometimes having blanks for missing values is a problem. So this person has a missing value here and here and here. So sometimes it can be a bit dangerous, as we say, with having formulas and the value is blank. So sometimes if you've got something like a categorical variable like this, where there's different categories of data in terms of the local authority, then you can create your own category called unknown. So you can create your own category where you're saying, this data is missing, I'm going to set this new category as unknown. So we're going to say in cell H2, we're going to say if the value in C2, so if the value in C2, so I'm going to type in here because it's easier to see. if the value in C2 is equal to double quotation marks, so that's saying if it is blank, so if it is blank equal to nothing, then we're going to say the term unknown. I spelled unknown there wrong. Otherwise, return the value C2. So what we're saying there is if my value in cell C2 is blank, return the word unknown, but if it's not blank, return the value C2. And if I autocomplete that, now when these people, when these people are unknown, they have blanks here, we get the term unknown over here. So that's dealt quite nicely with our missing data, and it means now we've not got blanks in our data somewhere. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to calculate some summary statistics about our data set. And we are going to be using functions to do this applied on our full columns. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to calculate what the maximum date of one of the columns is. So we want to find out what is the newest date of joining. So we're going to, in cell K2, we're going to do equals max. And then we're going to click on the top, we're going to click, if you kind of hover over the top of the column, E, then it highlights the whole column. So if you hover over E and you select all the way down, then it selects the whole column. You can also write inside your brackets E:E, and this applies your function to the whole column. I'm going to close that off, and that returns us that the maximum date that someone joined was the 9th of the 5th. And this is really great because it means if any new data comes into our data set, that is not a problem and our function will automatically update. So say a new person who joined our organization, and their date of joining, you don't need to follow this, but their date of joining was, say, today. What that happens is the formula, the value in K2 gets auto-updated. So it gets auto-updated, and this means that instead of doing stuff like sorting, where if new data came in, that sort wouldn't have kind of persisted, our function does auto-update if there's new data in there, which is really great. We're also going to do minimum date. So we're going to say min of the whole of column E and close that off. You can also do something like an average. So in in cell K4, we want to do an average. We're going to say equals average, and then we're going to take the whole of column B, so the whole of column B, and close that off, and that gives us the average age. Now, one of them has been picked up as an average age of 0. So again, we would need to maybe create a new column with an if statement to give people a missing value there. That's using that average formula. The next function that I'm going to talk about is handy for working out how many non-missing values you have. So non-missing values in the data. So we are going to type into cell K5. So we're going to say equals, and we're doing count. So counts how many entries are non-blank. So counts how many entries are non-blank. So if we do count and we put in there the whole of column B and close that off, so count and then the whole of column B, we're going to get that there was 9 values there. So there's 9 age values that are not missing. So we do have 1 missing value here, and that's why it's not giving us 10. So count is really handy for telling you how many non-missing or non-blank entries that you have in your data. So We're going to do the same for the local authority. What I want to do is know how many local authorities are not blank. So I'm going to do equal in cell K6. I'm going to do equals count. And I'm going to select the whole of column C. So the whole of column C. And I'm going to close that off. This is not what I wanted. Okay, so I've got value 0 here, which is not right. I should have like 7. So the issue here is it's a text column. So if it's a text column, you can't use count, you want to use count A. So instead of the function count, we're going to use count A. And if you click enter, that gives you 8. Now, unfortunately, the title has been picked up as one of them, so you would need to take away 1 from this number 8. But this tells you how many non-missing entries there are, or non-blank entries there are here. So the last two functions we're going to do, all the functions so far have been applied per one column. We are going to do count depending on a different column, or average depending on a different column. So let's say we want to know how to do the count, the number of IDs in service A. So we want to know how many people are in service A. We are going to use count if to do this. So count if is really handy for letting you count if a certain condition is met. So in cell K7, I'm just going to click over here a bit. In cell K7, I'm going to say equals count if, and it's asking me for 2 arguments, the range and the criteria. So the range is column D. So I'm going to select column D on here. So column D is the range, and then the condition that we want to meet here is that it is equal to the value A. So I'm saying count how many people are equal to the value A. So I'm going to do double quotation mark, the value A, and then another double quotation mark, because that lets us know that it's a string that it needs to be equal to. I'm going to close that off and say that tells me there's 5 people. So count if, really handy if you want to count if a certain condition is met. So again, the first argument is the range of which you're counting over, and the second argument is what you want to meet. So now we're on cell K8. This is our last formula. And what we want to do is we want to take the average age of people in service A. So we want to say the average age of people in service A. So we're going to say in our cell K8, we're going to do equals, and we're going to do average if. Average if. This is a great function, kind of like along the lines of sum if and that kind of thing. It works very similar to our last count if. So it says, what is the range? Then what is the criteria? And then what is the range that we want to actually average over? So the range that we want to check if our condition is met, so our condition being that the person is in service A. So we're going to select column D. And then the criteria is going to be A again, like the last time. But then this time, what we want to say is if this condition is met, so if someone is in service A, that their value in column D is A, we're going to average over this column, column B. We'll select the whole of column B. And if you're typing this out, it's D colon D, comma, then A in double quotation marks, bracket, not bracket, comma, B. Column B. And if we close that off, we get that the average age of people in service A is 49.25. So functions like sum if, count if, average if are really great if you want to calculate what's called these summary statistics, but based on some condition. And they can be really, really powerful when used this way. I've also added a little bit in the sheet over here, which is a bit more advanced. Feel free to kind of peruse this in your own time. This is if you don't want to actually type the value A into your function, and you want to have that value sitting outside. So what I've done here is use COUNTIF, and this is actually based on the values in column N. This means you don't need to go inside the function and write the term A. It can actually be based on an outside function. A bit more advanced, but feel free to have a look at that in your own time. I'm just checking the questions. No, we're all good. Okay. So another thing that you can do is you can show the formulas. So you can work out what formulas are in here, because sometimes it's hard to tell what is a value and what's a formula, because maybe someone else has made the spreadsheet, maybe you made the spreadsheet ages ago and you can't remember. You can go to formulas and go to show formulas. So if you go up to the formulas tab and go to show formulas, then this shows you what the actual formulas inside cells are. Obviously not very good to look at, it looks a bit horrible, but what it does let you know is it lets you know which cells have formulas inside them, which is really handy. Another thing that's really handy is the evaluate formula button ability. So if I click into G2 and I go to evaluate formula, you can, this is really handy if you get errors. I get lots of errors, and sometimes it's hard for me to work out where my errors are coming from. This evaluate formula lets you work this out. So like I said, I'm clicked into cell G2 and I've gone to the formulas tab and I've gone to evaluate formula. And what you can do here is you can step through. So you have cell B2, which is showing you how it's calculating this. So it's saying, what is B2? And if you click on evaluate, it's saying, okay, I'm working out that B2 is 45. And then it's testing, is 45 greater than 40? And I'm clicking evaluate, and it's saying, yes, it is true. And then it's saying, well, what am I doing next? It's this value if it's true, otherwise this. And it's telling you that that's how it's output. So the evaluate formula is really, really handy if you are looking to step through your... Cool. So the next thing we are going to look at, just as I finish off formulas as well, you also be aware that you can write formulas referencing another spreadsheet. So if I'm in maximum date, the tab formula on another sheet, and if I go to cell B2, and you can do a maximum on another sheet, apply a formula to another sheet. So I can say here that I'm going to do equals max. And if you want to do a formula that's applied to a different sheet and you click on formulas, the formulas tab, and now I select the whole of column E and close this off, I can use data that's in a different sheet. You can also use data that's in a different workbook as well. The way that it references it is it uses the tab name, exclamation mark, and then the column here as well. Cool. So the last thing that we're going to say about this sheet is the references tab. So we're going to talk a little bit about references. The first time I learned about references, it took me a wee bit to get there, but it's really, really handy and good if you're using this sort of dragging of functions. So what we can do here, let's say that we are calculating the percentage total of our values. So in cell B3, I have calculated what is the value in A3 divided by the values in A3 to A5. So I'm looking at what is 10 divided by the total of these, which is 100. Works out nicely at 10%. And I've set up my spreadsheet well. I've got one type of data per column. And what I want to do is I want to drag this formula. So I double click on this formula and it's looking a bit weird, right? This is not what I was expecting. I was expecting 10%, 30%, and 60%. So what's going on here? The problem is when the formula has been dragged down, the thing that you're dividing by, this red box, is also being dragged down with it. And that's not what we want. We want that red box to stay where it is and only the blue cell to be moved down. And the way to get around this is references. So in cell C3, what we've done is we've used a reference and that locks in the cells. So you can lock it in column-wise or you can lock it in row-wise. So what you can do here is you can put these dollar symbols in front of the numbers. So you can say here that I want to lock the row-wise, so I want to lock it at 3 to 5. So even if I drag this formula down, that red box is going to be locked at 3 to 5. So if I double click this, cell C3, double click, what you'll see now is what has been dragged is the blue cell only, not the red box. So references are really handy if you want to lock a kind of area of cells or a particular cell that you want to drag a formula. Another example of this is over here. I've got some calculation here where I multiply the quantity by the price. So I want to know, how many sales of something there are by a price. I'm going to drag this formula down. Oh, whoops, sorry. Drag this formula down and this is not what I wanted. I wanted this cell to be 2 times 5.1 and this cell to be 1 times 5.1. And again, this is because of the absolute reference. What's happened is not only has my blue cell been dragged down, but also my red cell has also been dragged down, which is not what I wanted. So you can do your locking in, your reference to lock it in. And what we've done there in cell H1 is we've locked in and we've put, if you see up here, a dollar symbol in front of the K and a dollar symbol in front of the 2. So we've locked that cell. And now if I drag this down, this is working as we want. And it's now keeping that red cell where it is, but dragging the blue cells down the way. Cool. So what we're going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about the other spreadsheet. Excel workbook examples number 2. Excel workbook examples number 2. And we're going to talk a little bit about index matching. So some people might be used to VLOOKUPs, which are quite widely used. Work in a very heavy regulated industry where I had to sit exams on Excel and all sorts of fun like that. And we were banned from using VLOOKUPs actually, due to issues with speed and also if you insert or delete rows there. If you're confident with VLOOKUPs, keep using them is what I would say. But if you want to learn, if you don't know about VLOOKUPs and or you want to learn about index matches, then please follow along. So index match as follows. Let's say we've got some service user data in our front tab and, oh, I didn't mean to click on that. Service user data in our front tab and I've got some survey results in my second tab. So what I want to do, you'll notice in the second tab that all the users are mixed up in a random order. But in my first tab, it's in new kind of sorted order. So I want to pull through the outcomes before and after based on some survey that we've taken of our service users. I want to drag it, well, not drag it, I want to put it into this tab here. So how do we work this out? We can do an index match. So first thing that we want to do is the match and then we do the index. So we can do in cell E3, we can do equals and we're going to say match. And the first thing that it asks for is the lookup value, then the lookup array, and then the match type. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to look up the value that's in A3. So I want to know, where is this person? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have referred to it as guy, girl before it is person. Person to be where they are in survey results. So I want to find, where is this person, user one, where do they sit in our survey results tab? So what we say is, where is the value in A3? Then I'm going to hop over to the survey results tab, and I'm going to apply it to the survey results tab, column A. So I want you to select the whole of column A. I want to find, where is value 1 in this column? And I don't want to manually go in and look at it. I want Excel to work it out for me. And then what we're going to do is a comma. And I'm not going to go too much into the matches here. 99% of the time, I imagine, I've just made that stat up, but there you go. You want an exact match. You're going to put the value 0. You want an exact match. You're going to put the value 0, and we're going to click that off. So in cell E3, what we've done there is we've said match, and I want Excel to find, where is this person that has ID 1? Where can I find them in the survey results first column? And what I get back is they are in 27, row number 27. And if, as a human, I go and look down, I see, yes, in fact, that is correct. Person with ID 1 is in cell 27. Happy days. We're not finished yet, because what we actually wanted was their outcome number, okay? So we found where they are, but that's not the thing that I'm looking for. I'm looking to find out their outcome number. So for this person 1, I'm basically trying to find value 2. So to do this, we do our next step, which is an index. So what we're going to do is equal index, and then it asks us to do what array, which basically means where's the data that you want to find, and then either the row number and or a column number. So you can actually apply an index match across columns and down rows. So you can do a double whammy if you want, but we're just going to do it one column at a time here. So we're saying, I've opened my index bracket and I'm going across to survey results, and I'm selecting column B there. So I'm selecting column B because that's where my information I want returned, and I do comma, hop back into service user data, and it's this value 27 that we're going to use. So then I select cell E3 and I close that off. And like magic, it has returned the value 2. And what I can do is select both these cells, double click, and that auto populates it for our data. So what that's done there is it's finding, where is the person in this second data set, and then what is the column of interest that you want to return for this person. So an index match allows you to do that. Now, you can write that inside one formula, so you can actually write the match in here. But if you're new to it, when I was new to it, I liked setting it out as 2 different kind of columns, and then I would just hide this column because I didn't actually need it in my data. But if you get a bit more advanced with index matches, you can just do it in one line of code. So index match is great for finding other data. We won't repeat it for outcome after, just for the sake of time. But what you'll notice here is there is some people that are missing. So this person who has ID 5, they actually don't have a match in this data. So they haven't filled out our survey, unfortunately. So they get back this hashtag NA. And there's different errors in Excel. I've got a bit in the slides of what different errors mean, because they don't all mean the same thing. If you want to get a bit more advanced, what you can do to deal with these errors is you can wrap this in an if NA. So you don't need to follow this, but this is quite a nice way of dealing with errors. In my cell F3, I'm wrapping my index. I'm going to say if any, and it says return me a value. But then the second argument, so after my brackets finished after my index, I want to say, if I get an error, what do I want returned? And maybe, I don't know, in our data set, missing values can be encoded in different ways. We kind of talked about the issues of having blanks, but we're going to go against our morals here and say, if there's an error, return just missing. So it's just double quotation marks with nothing in it. So I've wrapped my index in an if any to say, if there's an error, just return blank. I'm doing the double quotation marks. And then I'm going to double click this top one, and that gets rid of the NAs. Now, we've talked a wee bit about the issues with having blanks, but that if NAs are good at dealing with if you've got errors. Cool. And there's bits in the slide of dealing with errors. All of these errors, I've seen plenty of these in my time, they all mean kind of different things. Like one of them is like you're trying to divide by 0, another is like it's missing. So yeah, there's a nice resource in the slides there, all going to find how to deal with them. Another thing we're going to talk about is you can restrict changes on your spreadsheet. So if you have what's called like raw data that you basically don't want anyone to be able to touch or manually go in and change anything, you can set permissions on your spreadsheets. You can either set specific permissions, which, well, you can do it for your whole data set, or you can, your spreadsheet, or you can set it at specific sheets and things like that. So if you go to Format, and Protect Sheet. So Format, Protect Sheet. Here you can select or deselect things that you're allowing your users to do. So you can let people like view your spreadsheet but not type stuff in, things like that. You can have a look at that in your own time to see what kind of things you can let people do, and you can lock it with a password as well. If you want to protect your whole spreadsheet, if you go to File, Info, Protect Workbook. If you've got a different version of Excel, this menu might look a little bit different, but there is still the ability to protect the workbook. So do this if you don't want anyone to be able to go in and touch any of your precious formulas, or even worse, hard code over like the raw data. So you can set these if you don't want yourself or your co-workers to be able to make any changes as well. Generally about audit trails. I don't know if this has ever happened, but if you've ever tried to recreate like a graph or a figure or something and you have no idea how you got that number. Maybe you did it yesterday and you can't remember, maybe you did it a month ago, maybe you got something from a colleague and you're like, I cannot work out how they got this from the spreadsheet. Clear what's called audit trails, ways to work out how you get to certain things, are really important along with documentation. So audit trail is kind of like a record of how you got to certain things, and it can be really helpful. One tip I would give about this is to have like a front page of instructions. So if you have like a big workbook that has lots of tabs doing lots of different things, have a tab at the front which you can type out in whatever language to say what it is the spreadsheet is doing, maybe where the data is from, the date that you extracted the data, stuff like that. You can also do things like add comments to. It depends what version of Excel you have, but if you right click on a cell, you can add a note or a comment. Comments, I think, is easier to reply to, or you can add a note, and that lets people, like it, depending on the version of Excel, you might have this little red kind of triangle up top right, and it lets people know there's something going on with the cell. Perhaps it's something that you're looking into, and it lets people know kind of what's going on there. Trail tips is color coding your cells. This is not me like preaching either, each to their own. You do not have to follow these if you don't want to, but as I say, I used to work in a very heavily regulated industry and had to do exams on this, and this is what we had to kind of follow. And I do think some of it is really, really helpful. So color coding your cells can be really helpful for letting people know what's going on in your spreadsheet. So we used to have the cells colored purple if they were pasted data. So that is data kind of extracted from a CRM system or something like that. And that is the raw data that's not to be touched. Green would be an author input, so a number that I have typed in. Yellow, light yellow, would be a formula. So it lets people know, don't hard code over this cell. This is a formula cell and I don't want you touching it. Don't type over this because it's got a formula in it. And a key output would be blue. So if you've got some big spreadsheet doing a lot of calculations to get to one number at the end, you can color that number blue so people know that it's kind of like the end output. Use formulas where possible. We've shown here that even, those formulas that we used earlier, even if we got new data in, new service users to our organization, the results in our formulas are all going to auto-update. There's not that worry that, I've only, applied this formula to a small area. I'm going to have to drag that area if new data comes in. Applying formulas column-wise really gets over this. And you can also use formulas to do checks. So we used to have to do checks to say, I don't know, like the result of last month is only like within a 5% range of this, of the month before, that kind of thing. You can use if statements to do this, and then like the word check comes up if a number is not good. And it avoids that kind of manual checking of things. You want to try as much as possible to use Excel to its benefit. It's so well set up for these kind of things, and want to minimize the sort of manual input that we're doing. Slight tangent, but it really helps with Excel. It helps with PowerPoint, etc. File naming tips. I don't know about you, but I used to have so many files called like final. This time I really mean the final one. No one has a clue which one is actually the final one or what changes there are between different ones. We used to have to use file naming conventions. So it would be the date, so year, month, day, the name of the file, and then we would start with version 0.1. Any changes, kind of, meaningful changes, not necessarily like, I fixed one cell, you would go to version 0.2, all the way up to version 1, where this would be the first final, which you would use for a report or maybe a meeting. And then if there's any changes after that, it's version 0.1, 1.1, so on. This means that when you go back, you know which version of this spreadsheet was used on what date. And it makes it easier to recreate. You can also have a little note file in the folder where all these are saved to save what are the changes between each of them, so people actually know, how does version 1.1 differ from 1.2? Also, if you're copying and pasting any graphs from an Excel file into PowerPoint, in the kind of speaker's comments or like at the bottom of the slide, I would just say this graph comes from version 1.2 or something like that. So yeah, again, you don't have to follow these rules, but they're just something that make it a lot easier to work out what's going on and avoiding all the finals. Pivot tables. So people pivot tables, some love, some hate. I don't think they're available in Excel for Mac, I think, but if you've got Microsoft Excel, then you can use them. So pivot tables are a really good way of aggregating up your data. So let's say I want to know how many people are in each local authority or in each service in my data. Now, we've just shown how we can use formulas to do that. We can do count ifs, average ifs, sum ifs. But if you want to do this quickly, you can use pivot tables. So I'm going to select the data in columns A to D. And if you go to the Insert tab and go to Pivot Table, now I like to keep pivot tables on a separate tab, mainly just because I like to have all my raw data untouched on one tab and then any calculations on another one. So the default is to have it in a new worksheet. And then you get this worksheet that looks a bit like this. And I'll be honest with you, for me, it's a lot of trial and error. I like to just play around and see what works and what doesn't. So I said I wanted to know how many people are in each service type. So I know that my table, if I visualize what I want my table to be, I want in the rows, I want each service, and then my values is going to be the count of the number of people. So I'm going to drag service into rows, and then I'm going to drag ID into values. And what it's done is it's summed the IDs, which is not what I wanted. You know, ID 1 plus ID 5 doesn't equal ID 7. So if you want to change the way that something's aggregated, some might be appropriate for another variable, but you can you can click on it in the bottom left here, value field settings, count. So I'm going to click count as my aggregator here. Okay. And what I get here is that 23 people are in service A, 14 B, and 13 in C. And you can do things like I can drag local authority into filters, even like filter my data, see how many people are in the city of Edinburgh. 17 of them are in service A, 9 in B, 4 in C. So you can really start to kind of what we call like explore your data using pivot tables. Quite a nice quick way of doing it. You can also actually do a pivot chart, which I was relatively new to. You can, if you're clicked on your pivot table and you click on, if you're in the pivot table analyze tab and go to pivot chart, and it kind of recommends which chart it thinks best, bars good here, it automatically creates a chart for you, which is quite nice. And that filter kind of persist through, so you can actually filter your data and visualize it in this nice way here. So that's pivot tables and pivot charts there. I'm going to talk a wee bit about visualization. This is a bit of a repeat if you went to Tableau workshop earlier. Sometimes knowing which chart is best is the hardest thing. And there's a little flow chart here if you want to be able to know a bit about these, and a link to different charts. I'm going to send all the slides afterwards and it's got all the links. But big recommendation here is avoid chart junk is what they call it. So avoid things like 3D effects, avoid things like cluttered backgrounds, avoid unnecessary use of color. All these things detract the user from actually being able to understand the data. So at the end of the day, if it's a bar chart, if you're going to get analytical about it, what I actually really need to know is how much bigger is one bar from another. You might use color to bring in a third variable of information, but at the end of the day, use color as and when it's needed. And sorry to give another shout out, but if you want to know more about this, definitely watch. There was a few really good talks on Monday. There might have been more good ones yesterday, particularly Oliver's talk on data viz. It's got some tips on thinking about your visualization. So we're going to kind of bring this all together, and we have some raw data, and what we want to know is which day of the week has the most visits. Let's go to this Excel workshop examples 2, and we've been given this data in the visits date tab. And I want to know, my manager has asked me, which day of the week do we have most visits to our service? And it's nicely colored purple because it's raw data. So what I want to do, the first thing I'm thinking to myself is like, okay, well, I need to know which day of the week each of these dates is. So I'm going to my trusty people friend X function. Oh, the help of this little function, right? For day of the week. And sorry, my internet's a wee bit slow, but you get here that there is a function called text, and I would go in and explore all these results. But what I can see is there's a function called text, and if I input text and then have the date value followed by DDDD, this is going to return me the day of the week. If I just have 3 Ds, it's like MUN, TO, etc., the abbreviated one. So great. We're going to go into cell C2 and we're going to say text. I want my date to be my next one. And as trusty Google, there are other search providers out there. If you want to use a different one, DDDD. And this is going to return me Saturday. And I'm going to color this yellow. So all my trusted colleagues know, and my future self know that this is a formula and I haven't manually inputted the word Saturday. I'm going to double click this and it's all auto-completed. The next thing I want to do is I could manually type out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. But I'm just going to show you this nice little feature of Excel, which I really like. So I want you to select the whole of column C, copy it, go over to column E, and I want you to paste as values. So paste, under the paste options, paste as values. We don't want those formulas being pasted over, it's the values. And then if you go to Data tab with column E highlighted, and under the Data Tools section, you go to Remove Duplicates. Okay. And what that does is it just returns you the distinct values that are in there. We can then go to Home, the Home tab. I can go to Custom Sort. And actually, Excel's been really clever here and worked out that I want Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. clicked. Okay, and that's sorted that. You can also just manually type out Monday, Tuesday, etc. Then I'm going to do a count if. So in here, in this column C, I want to count the number of times that the word Monday appears. So count if, select the whole of column C, and then it's E2 because it's the value for Monday. Enter that. Highlight this yellow and double click again. So I've counted how many times there's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. And then we're not going to go too much into visualization here, but I can select from E2 to F8. I can go to Insert, and I'm going to do a line chart because it's over time. And I get this chart here. And as I said, I'm not going to go too much into charts, but you can do things like add a good title, visits by day of week. I would add an axis label. You don't need to follow along with this because I realise I'm going quite fast. Number of visits. And you might also do something like adding data labels, something like that. If I had a bit more time, I would tidy this up. Some of the labels are on the lines there. Another thing I would do is make the grid lines, either remove them or make them very light grey, because you want that blue line to be the main data ink on your chart. What we've done there is a lot of stuff in one go, but and I'm sorry for the speed at the end there. I've maybe tried to cram a bit too much work. So we've been through all this. The other thing to say, there's a final file in the folder that you pre-2007 version. It might be not all the functionality is available, but this is the type of thing that you can actually build using all of the things that we talked about today. So this, you don't need to have tools like Tableau, etc. to build dashboards. They are preferable, but you can do things in Excel. So this is a really common thing that I used to have to do to kind of prove to people that they might want to invest in something else. So in my data tab, I've got my raw data that's in a separate tab that's untouched. In my engine tab, I've got all my calculations based on my data tab. All of these functions are things that we learned about today. And then I've got a little thing with my user input. And what I can do is switch between genders or ages, and my dashboard changes here. So a nice kind of graphical representation using the exact stuff that we learned today, that allows people to kind of dig into your data. You can get a little bit further and do something to do with macros, but it's not a necessity for sure. Final tips, I've got some tips there about data visualization. I'll let you guys read them in your own time. It's kind of just things like make sure you have labels on your axis, and make sure you have a chart label, make sure you're starting at 0, not too many decimal points, these kind of things. Simplistic is better. And the final few things I'll just say is a couple of last tips. Is that you can, I don't know if you've ever had an issue where you're trying to switch between 2 tabs in an Excel file all the time. It can be, I'm just going to open a random tab here, and you can go to View and New Window. What this will do is open up your spreadsheet almost again, and it means you can have 2 tabs in your spreadsheet open at the same time. But what you'll see is when I type in here, it types in the second window as well. So it's real time in this way, but it means I can have 2 tabs of the same spreadsheet open at the same time and work in them simultaneously, which is quite nice. I can't remember which is the one I opened second. Let's close this off. And another tip, I think it was the other one. This is not zoomed in enough. Another tip is a little bit about data validation. I'm not going to go too much into this, but sometimes what you might get if you manually let people input the data, things like spelling mistakes, and then when you use your nice count if formulas, like this person, this person, this person, and maybe this person all meant Monday, but they're all being picked up in different ways. What you can do is something called data validation, which comes under the data tab in here. And you can create things like lists, which means that people have to input values from a given list. Also helpful if you need things like an ID number, it has to be eight digits long, and you're finding that people are putting in IDs that are like 7 digits, 6 digits. What you can get is this pop-up box that comes up and says the ID number should be 8 digits long. So this kind of data validation is quite good to kind of help as much as possible. Got some more information in the slides there about that. And the last kind of thing I'll say is also freeze panes is really handy if you've got long data. Let me find a tab that's got long data in it. Perhaps this survey results one. You know, if I start to scroll down here, I'm like, what column is what? Because the headers have gone. You can select a row that you basically want to freeze above. You can go to View, freeze panes, and that header is going to get retained the whole way down there, which is really nice. Tips, kind of stuff we've talked about. Make sure your data starts from A1 and not kind of floating somewhere in the middle of the spreadsheet. You want to be thinking about if more data was added in, would my calculations still work? Have one tab for raw data. Everything hopefully should be formula based on columns, and make sure you're documenting things properly. And I've also put some keyboard shortcuts that you can use as well. I'll let you guys read these in your own time if you so wish. It's all just about planning your workbooks and things. But there's lots of resources out there. There's free online courses. YouTube's great for learning more stuff. Also Microsoft, anytime you see in the slides, there's like orange text and underline, that's a hyperlink. So Microsoft have got some really good training resources online as well. Yeah, just get some data, play around with it. There's lots of free data out there, free being open, not that you have to pay for it. And also there's this cool website called Mockaroo, which is a great name, which lets you create fake data. So if you want to kind of mess around with data that is a particular kind of shape or has particular variables, you can use Mockaroo to create this up. You can also kind of go one step further in terms of visualization if your data gets too big. If the visualizations in Excel are kind of stopping you from going beyond, There's other data visualization tools out there. One of them being Tableau. The other one, if you like Excel and you're like the look of Excel products, Power BI is a really good one, and it comes free as part of your Microsoft 365 kind of package. There's kind of restrictions on data size and security, but if you're using it to mess around with as a starter, it's free. And I've written some benefits of using these in terms of, not having to create multiple graphs at different levels of granularity. You can deal with much bigger data sets than Excel. The visuals get automatically updated, all these kind of things, and you don't need to be able to code to do them. But Excel fits purpose for many places, and you don't necessarily need these. It kind of depends on what you're after. So thanks very much for attending. Sorry if that was maybe a wee bit rushed at the end there, but I'm going to send a link to the slides with everything there. Like I say, I really like this kind of thing. If you want to know anything more, or you've got any feedback or tips that you think I'm missing, or tips that you think other people might like, feel free to put them in the chat. There's all links to all my kind of contact details there. And I'm also going to kind of point you to this app, which is also linked in the notes, which I created. Probably my internet's maybe not going to hold up. Which is to make it easier to navigate through the Scottish Charities data set. Go on there and pick charity purposes of your type or an area that you're particularly interested in, and internet permitting, look through the data and find out some. So yeah, my internet's being a bit slow. So yeah, the link's in the slide there, so you can have a look. Cool. I'm going to check the chat now to see what kind of questions we've got going on. I'll actually just post the slides in the chat as well, so people have that in case they need to head off. That's the link to the slides. I probably should have written the word slides in front of that, but there you go. If anyone's got any issues seeing that, just let me know. Why do you use if any rather than if error? Is there a difference between the two? Oh, good question. I think if any only returns it if there's an NA error, but as I said, there's many other types of error, which may be picked up in that way. I think in the slides it talks about the two. I can't remember which slide it was on. But yeah, it talks about using both of them. I think in our case, if the data was missing, then an NA error would come up, but perhaps there is a different error caused by something else, which is when if error would be the case. So yeah, that's a good question there, Alice. Simon's asked, if in a column A, I want to select every row with the value apple and paste the rows into another sheet, how would I do that? Want to select every row with the value apple. What I would probably do there is I would filter and then copy the results. Someone else might have do this. But what I would probably do there would be I'd add a filter onto here. Filter, let's say Edinburgh is apple. So I'd unselect all of them apart from Edinburgh, and then I'd copy that data here and paste it into another sheet. Hope that's what you were asking, something similar along those lines. But if not, then do message me if it was something else. Cool. So I've kind of run out of time. How can you work forms that will still allow data to be added to the spreadsheet? Good question. I think you would go into the restricted changes thing, which was in the format one, and protect sheet, there's different things that you can select there. So you might be able to deselect the things that you want people to be able to do and unselect the other ones. So yeah, hopefully that'll be there. Cool. So I have really, but thank you so much for attending. Hopefully you have the links to the slides. Feel free to watch it back. And like I say, message me if you have any feedback or if you've got any questions, but I really appreciate you attending. Thanks very much.